Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. In today's episode we shall be continuing to review and analyse the 10th edition Imperial Guard Index, this time casting our critical eye over the Attilan Rough Riders. Some people might say that horses have no business being on the battlefields of the 41st millennium, but the Attilan Rough Riders would take issue with that. They add an extra close combat counter-attack element to the Guard, as well as seasoning it with just a pinch of mobility, bringing speed to an army that otherwise is traditionally quite slow and lumbering. In fact, back in 9th edition, Attilan Rough Riders were considered by many to be an S-tier option, with the capability of toppling knights in a single charge from their melter-tipped hunting lances. But have they been able to retain this lofty status, or have they been left behind in the new edition? Well, there's only one way to find out. It's time to ride for ruin, ride for death, and the world's ending, and gallop right into today's episode. As is tradition, we shall begin with a brief overview of what the hell the Rough Riders actually are. Essentially, both on the tabletop and in the lore, Rough Riders are the light cavalry of the Guard. Typically, their role consists of scouting ahead of the main army, doing some flanking maneuvers, picking off isolated units, hit and run attacks, and occasionally, when the circumstances permit, carrying out a mass cavalry charge to sweep away the enemy attack or to exploit a pretty big breakthrough. Historically, their specific role on the battlefield has been one of a counter-attack unit. You see, they are a bit of a glass hammer, so sending them off to lead the assault tends to result in them all dying, but keeping them hidden out of line of sight or towards the back of your lines and then using their speed to move forward and countercharge has been something they've been able to do very well over the course of the editions. And let's find out if they're still going to do this in 10th by taking a look underneath the rock, getting into the deep dive, and we'll begin with their stat line. They've got a movement value of 12, which straight off the bat is brilliant. That's exactly the kind of maneuverability these guys should be bringing to the battlefield. As crazy as it sounds, this makes them faster than most Guard vehicles. A lot of things, including Chimeras, have had their movement reduced down to 10. So the fact that Rough Riders have still got a 12-inch move does give them a USP, and in your endo, every inch does matter, and those 2 extra inches will be noticed. They also have a toughness of 4 and a 4+ save and 2 wounds each. This makes them noticeably tougher than your standard guardsman. This isn't just a regular soldier on a horse riding around. He's tougher, he's faster, he's got a better save, and he's got more wounds. Rough Riders are not really durable. If the enemy dedicates any firepower to them, they're going to get taken out. But a smattering of bolter fire, a hail of inaccurate lasgun bolts, they'll probably be able to weather that. They've got some durability against incidental small arms fire, but will struggle to they will struggle to stand up against any sort of concentrated tension. Leadership of 7+, pretty standard issue. I think that's the same leadership on every unit in the Guard Index, bar the Commissar, and an OC of 1. I would have liked to see an OC of 2, simply because 1 OC should be for the horse, and 1 should be for the guy. But as it is, they've kept it in line with most other elite non-battle line units, and they've given them an objective control of 1. It's fine, it's not much to complain. Overall, it's a good profile and definitely a step up from your standard human one that we've seen on everything else, even including characters. But now let us take a look at the weapons and war gear. In terms of unit composition, each Rough Rider squad comes with a Rough Rider Sergeant and 4 to 9 other Rough Riders, so you can take squads of 5 to 10. Each model comes equipped with a lasgun, a las pistol, a hunting lance, and the steed's hooves. Yes, that is right. Horses can kick people in the face. It's like good old Warhammer Fantasy again. In terms of war gear options, for every 5 models in this unit, 1 model hunting lance can be replaced with a goad lance, and the Rough Rider Sergeant can be equipped with a power saber. Range weapons aren't much to write home about. It's a las gun. It's cool that they have them, means they can fire a few bolts off at long range, but it's not the reason you're taking them. Much cheaper sources of las gun fire, both in real world money and in-game points. And the las pistols, if they ever do anything, I'd be surprised. Melee weapons is a different story. This is where things get interesting. The standard hunting lance is quite a nice weapon because it has tactical flexibility. You see, it comes equipped with either a frag tip or a melter tip. Now, a lot of new guard players make the mistake of thinking they have to pick which tip their Rough Riders are going to be equipped with at the beginning of the game and then stick with it throughout. That is not the case. Think of it as like a grenade launcher. You pick the shot you fire. Pick which tip your hunting lances are going to be equipped with. And you can either have the frag tip and then next combat you can have the melter tip, or vice versa. You can mix it up however you want as each combat takes place. So the frag tip is the anti-infantry option. It is D6, weapon skill 3+, strength 4, AP 0, damage 1 attacks. But it does have lance, which means when you charge, it gets +1 to wound. Even with that, I think that the frag tip is very, very underwhelming, quite disappointing. It's D6 bolter shots. If it wasn't good on the Bulgrin's Grenadier Gauntlet, I don't see why it would be good here. Sure, you can tell the Artillery Rough Riders to fix bayonets. They are a regiment unit, so they could end up hitting on 2s, which is cool. But what happens if you ride a bunch of them into combat and you just roll 1s and 2s to the number of shots? You can have 5 models doing 5 attacks. Just not great. On the other hand, you could do 30 attacks, but that's swingy, and there's no blast here. If it was D6 +1 or D6 +2, I'd probably be much more inclined to lean towards the frag tip, but as it is, I'm not a fan of it, not even slightly. You do get the Steed's Hooves. Now the Steed Hooves are extra attacks, which are essentially 2 more weapon skill, 4+ this time, strength 4, AP 0, damage 1 attacks. But in a funny sort of way, I see the frag tip as not even as good as the Steed's Hooves, because the Steed's Hooves are at least a consistent 2 attacks, whereas frag tip could just let you down the worst possible moment. So it's an okay weapon. I think in the right circumstances, if it just goes off and you're just going against a bunch of like infantry, like light infantry, like guardsmen or their equivalent, then sure. I mean, I'd love to see a bunch of Rough Riders sweep away some POW fire warriors in combat, but it doesn't have an AAP. It doesn't really have a way of getting extra AP, and it might just let you down at the worst possible moment. So for me, frag tip is a no-no. But the melter tip is where things start getting good. It's only 1 attack, but it is at weapon skill 3+ with fixed bayonets that will beat weapon skill 2+. Strength 9, AP -4, D6 damage. It's a very punchy attack, which only gets punchier when you remember that it has lance, giving it +1 to wound when you charge. So even the toughest tanks in the game will be wounded on 4s by the Rough Riders when they charge. And if you start sending them into infantry, including things like Custodes, you're wounding them on 2s. Strength 9 with +1 to wound, in my mind, is the sweet spot. It's the Goldilocks zone. It's possibly the best combination of strength and abilities, because it really does allow you to go into any target in the game reliably. The only fly in the ointment with the hunting lance is the D6 damage. If it was swingy on D6 attacks with the hunting lance frag tip, it's swingy on the D6 damage with the hunting lance melter tip. Personally, I would like to see this become D6 +2. Essentially, it is a point blank melter shot. It should have the benefit of essentially always being in melter range. And I think it's all well and good having the extra to wound and the AP and the strength and all the other bits that make you get across the line. But if you stumble at the final hurdle and you just roll a 1 on the damage, especially considering you're going against vehicles which are going to have more wounds, and yeah, it could just You could fail at the last hurdle and you've done everything else right, and you fail because of a D6 damage. When I was playing my last tournament with the 8th edition Guard Codex, and don't worry, this is going somewhere, I ran a lot of Demolisher Cannons, and I realized in that last tournament how much I hated D6 damage weapons. Because every single time I just needed to roll a 3+, I'd roll a 1 or a 2. Every time. And my concern is that whilst the melt tip looks great and it's going and going and going, it's going to let you down. You're going to get the 1 damage. And considering your guys are pretty fragile, they're going to not be able to survive the counterpunch if they are forced into a prolonged combat due to some unlucky D6 rolls. But do not despair, my horsey boy enthusiasts, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is one last lance we need to look at, which is the Goad Lance. Now remember, you can only get 1 of these per 5, but in my opinion, it's probably the best lance out of all of them. It's a melee weapon. It has 2 attacks, meaning that's more than the Melter Lance and also a bit more reliable than the Frag Tip as well. It's never going to let you down. Weapon skill 3+, so of course 2+ with fixed bayonets. Strength 6. With the fact that it has the lance rule, means that even Leman Russes are being wounded by 4s by these things. And again, most heavy infantry except Custodes are going to be wounded on 2s. 8. And then you've got AP -2, which in many cases is going to be enough to kick elite infantry onto their invulnerable save, kill light infantry outright, and take marines and vehicles down to an uncomfortable 4 or 5+ save, and it's 2 damage. So again, it doesn't let you down. The reason why I love the Goad Lance is I like weapons which are reliable. This is a personal thing, and I put a lot of value behind that. The Hunting Lance might let you down on the D6 hits. The Melt, or it might do really, really well. The Melter Lance might get 6 damage, or it might get 1. The Goad Lance just always does 2 attacks, and it just always does 2 damage, and for me, you almost can't put a price on that. It's really, really nice. So if you're thinking of taking Rough Riders, I would say it is an auto-include to take 1 to 2 Goad Lances depending on the size of the unit you've gone for. And last but certainly not least, we have the Power Saber, the weapon that your Rough Rider Sergeant can take. This is a melee weapon with 4 attacks at weapon skill 3+, strength 4, AP -2, 1 damage. Quite nice actually. 4 attacks from a squad sergeant with what is essentially a power sword. Hard to complain about that. For me, if you're going into a bunch of light to medium infantry and your sergeant's got both a hunting lance and a power saber, probably going to use that saber every time. It gets more average attacks than a frag tip, and it's just going to cut down quite a lot of light infantry in one go, especially with, again, you take into account fixed bayonets. I know I've said that a lot in this video. So I quite like the Power Saber. Last edition, it was a bit of a nice to have. It was all right. This edition, I think it outshines the Hunting Lance frag tip in its anti-infantry capacity. But that covers all of the ranged and melee weapons. Let us move on to the abilities. And the Rough Riders just have 1. Horsemasters. You can ignore any or all modifiers to this unit's move characteristic and to advance and charge rolls made for it. In addition, this unit is eligible to shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which it fell back. This ability is quite nice, but I don't think it's particularly good. It'll pop up now and again. Being able to ignore movement modifiers is powerful, but remember, typically your Rough Riders are going to be just behind your front lines. They're going to sometimes use the full 12-inch move, but often they'll probably be using 6 or 8 or 9 inches before they start bumping into the enemy units they're meant to be countercharging. Being able to ignore any shenanigans your opponent might pull off is nice, but honestly, I feel they've got enough movement to not worry about it too much anyway. And falling back and charging again on paper is really good, but remember, Rough Riders are very, very unlikely to get into a protracted combat. Either they're going to charge into the enemy and wipe them out, or they're going to charge into the enemy and not wipe them out, and then there's a good chance that the enemy will, as a combat unit, kill all the Rough Riders. So I think being able to fall back and charge is nice, but I don't know if it's going to pan out in reality. How I imagine Rough Riders are typically going to work is you charge into something that you can relatively easily deal with. Maybe it's a unit of Marines or something equivalent, and you do enough damage to them where you either kill them all or you make them essentially combat ineffective, and the opposing player is not going to want to stay in combat with you, so they fall back. At that point, when it comes back to your turn, if your Rough Riders are still alive, they're not going to be able to fall back and charge. Or you go in and you bounce, at which point your relatively fragile Rough Riders get their shit filled in and they all die. Maybe one or two of them survive and you might want to fall back and charge again, but one or two Rough Riders isn't going to have a huge impact. Maybe there'll be a circumstance here and there, one game in 20, where that ability to get those couple of Rough Riders to fall back and charge something else, maybe that'll pop up, but I'm just not certain how impactful it's going to be. It looks good on paper, but I don't know if that's going to translate to the tabletop. And here's the thing. I think that scenario pretty much sums up my issues with Rough Riders. Because sure, they're kind of durable on paper, but 4+ save isn't going to do much for you if you have got 2 wounds. 40k is meant to be a bit less lethal, but it typically is still very, very, very gnarly at competitive levels. And you've got some combat ability, but I feel like when you get to the table, an average of 3.5 attacks with that hunting lance is not something you can rely upon. Same with the damage from the melter tip. And you don't quite have enough goad lances and power sabers to make up the difference. And your ability is a bit meh. Maybe it'll be all right, maybe it won't. And so I just can't help but feel like Rough Riders are a pale shadow of their former selves. I think that, especially when you take into account they've lost Scything Momentum, which was an ability they used to have in 9th edition, which gave them +2 strength. Really nice. That meant that you were able to get good wounds with the hunting lance, even against medium infantry. And although your AP wasn't much to write home about, just through pure number of attacks, you were able to get the job done. And I also think that it meant that your melters went from being anti-medium and light vehicles to anti-everything. Imagine if you still had +2 strength on the charge with your melter tips, you'd be up to strength 11. That's threatening Lehman Russes, plus then you've got lance. That's great. You know what I mean? So I feel like they've lost quite a lot and they've become a lot less reliable, considering that, again, frag tips used to be 2 attacks. Each time you make an attack, you got 2 more attacks. So actually you get like 6 attacks from frag tips. Now it's D6. Melter tips were 2 attacks just base. So I just can't help but feel like Rough Riders have not translated well from 9th to 10th at all. However, there is just one thing that is stopping me from labeling them as trash. One caveat, one different angle, which I think keeps them in the game. If you look at them in comparison to Rough Riders of 9th edition, yeah, awful. But compare them to an infantry squad in 10th edition. Rough Riders are only 15 points more, which means they're actually 20 points cheaper than they were in 9th. 80 points for a squad of 5. And that will get you a squad which has got the same amount of wounds as a 10-man infantry unit, much smaller footprint, save 4+, with better save. They're still regiments, so they can benefit from cover and take cover and all sorts of stuff. Toughness 4 and double movement. And they can also come back with things like reinforcements and stuff like that. And they are something that can keep up with your Lord Solar if you want a very fast moving, roving Lord Solar, although I think he is better off with the command squad in a big blob of infantry. My point is that if you look at them not as a counter-attacking unit that's going to sweep away your enemies that charge in, and instead you look at them as a very mobile screen that is going to essentially be tougher, better save, and much faster than a squad of infantry, I think they start coming into their own. I think if you're a fan of the Rough Riders, that's how I would now see them. You've got some movement blocking that needs doing, especially competitive boards with all of that terrain that vehicles are going to struggle to move through. Rough Riders can just block it, stop the enemy from coming through. I think that's where they shine. I think that's their new battlefield role. It's not quite as glamorous as their old one, but a good move block can win you the game. Of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Are Rough Riders trash or hidden treasure? And how do they stack up against the Death Riders, the Death Corps of Krieg, the Forge World cavalry unit? If you've enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button, and as always, subscribe to never miss an episode. And I just want to say, if you found today's video particularly helpful or informative, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. By supporting the channel, you will not only be helping me create more content, but unlocking loads of perks for yourself, including access to the Mordian Glory Discord server. This is an online community with over 2,000 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We have got channels for army lists, tactics, hobbying, painting, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. And I just want to take a moment to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. You truly are the lifeblood of this channel, and I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without your generous support. And last, but certainly not least, I want to say a personal, special, heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier supporters. These are the War Masters, the people that have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Bon Vert, Ken Starr, Mark Panconi, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Thank you guys. Your ongoing and incredibly generous support makes a huge difference, and I am eternally grateful to each and every single one of you. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.